That morning, Alina, a flight attendant for a renowned airline, was carrying out her duties as usual. She had been working in the aviation industry for 5 years and was accustomed to dealing with various types of passengers. That day's flight from Dubai to Moscow was filled with business people, tourists, and a few high-class passengers. As always, Alina and her colleagues ensured that all passengers boarded the plane in an orderly manner and sat according to their tickets. However, her eyes were drawn to a man who entered the business class cabin with a relaxed stride. Unlike other passengers who were typically dressed neatly, this man wore a black hoodie with the hood almost covering his face and loose sweatpants. A sense of suspicion immediately arose in Alina's mind. As a flight attendant, she had been trained to stay alert to any possibilities for the safety of the flight. The man stood out not only because of his simple appearance, but also due to his calm demeanor and lack of conversation. He didn't look like a businessman or a high-class tourist who usually occupied the business class cabin. Without thinking twice, Alina approached the man and said politely but firmly, "Excuse me, sir. May I see your ticket and identification?" The man slightly lifted his face, revealing a neutral yet friendly expression, then pulled out his ticket from his pocket without saying a word. Alina took the ticket and examined it carefully. The ticket confirmed that the man indeed had a seat in business class, but her suspicion did not fade. She then asked the man to remove his hood. For a moment, Alina caught a sharp gaze from him, but he complied and lowered his hood, revealing his full face. Even so, Alina still felt that something was off. Business class passengers usually didn't behave this casually or wear such relaxed clothing. Doubt crept in again, and she began considering calling security to ensure everything was in order. Not wanting to take any risks, Alina waved at one of her colleagues for further confirmation. Some nearby passengers started noticing the interaction, making the atmosphere slightly tense. The man remained silent and showed no signs of protest, simply sitting calmly while waiting for Alina's decision. One of the flight attendants witnessing the situation also began to feel uneasy and supported Alina's decision to call the supervisor. "Please wait a moment, sir. We just want to make sure everything is in accordance with protocol," Alina said in a professional yet slightly cautious tone. When the airline supervisor arrived, the atmosphere in the business class cabin grew even quieter. It only took the supervisor a few seconds to recognize the man in question. His face immediately changed, his eyes widened, and he quickly whispered to Alina, "Don't you know who this is?" Alina frowned, confused. "This is KHABIB Nurmagomedov," the supervisor continued in a half-panicked tone. Instantly, the blood drained from Alina's face. She suddenly realized her grave mistake. She had treated one of the most famous and respected athletes in the world with suspicion. Her heart pounded, and a deep sense of embarrassment began to wash over her. Alina felt her body tense up upon hearing the name KHABIB Nurmagomedov come from her supervisor's mouth. She wasn't a fan of mixed martial arts, but she had heard the name several times from her friends. KHABIB was a former UFC world champion, famous for his undefeated record throughout his career. He was respected not only for his prowess in the ring, but also for his humility and extraordinary discipline. Alina swallowed hard, realizing that she had just treated one of the greatest athletes in the world with disrespect. Her eyes slowly shifted to KHABIB, who was still sitting calmly, seemingly unfazed by the way he had been treated. The supervisor quickly bowed slightly as a sign of apology. "Mr. Nurmagomedov, we sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. Please enjoy your flight comfortably," he said in a respectful tone. Alina, still in shock, immediately followed her supervisor's lead and softly said, "I'm truly sorry, sir. I didn't recognize you earlier." She felt incredibly embarrassed. KHABIB looked at her briefly before giving a slight smile and saying, "It's okay. I understand. You're just doing your job." His response was simple, yet it made Alina feel even more guilty. Meanwhile, several other passengers who recognized KHABIB began whispering among themselves. Some of them even seemed excited and quickly took out their phones to snap photos from a distance. A man sitting not far from KHABIB gathered the courage to ask, "Mr. KHABIB, may I take a photo with you after takeoff?" KHABIB smiled and nodded politely, showing his relaxed demeanor despite just experiencing an unpleasant incident. Alina felt even smaller. How could someone as famous as him remain so calm after being treated with such suspicion? Throughout the rest of the boarding process, Alina still felt awkward. Every time she walked past KHABIB, she couldn't help but steal glances at him. KHABIB simply sat there, occasionally using his phone and chatting a little with the passenger next to him. There wasn't the slightest sign that he was offended or angry about what had happened. In fact, he seemed completely unbothered. This only made Alina admire him even more while feeling ashamed at the same time. If this had happened to another celebrity, they might have been furious or even demanded special treatment as compensation. But KHABIB remained just as the world knew him, calm, humble, and mature. A few minutes before takeoff, the supervisor approached Alina and whispered, "Let this be a lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance." Alina could only nod weakly. She had truly learned something valuable that day. This experience was a hard lesson for her, not just as a flight attendant, but also as a person. She realized that in her job, she had to always remain professional and not be too quick to judge someone based on their looks. The plane finally began taxiing toward the runway, while Alina was still trying to compose herself after the incident that had just unfolded. Throughout the flight, Alina couldn't shake off her guilt. She kept thinking about how she had treated KHABIB disrespectfully. Even though KHABIB seemed unbothered, she still felt ashamed of her actions. Every time she passed by the legendary fighter seat, she wanted to apologize again, but she was afraid it would only make the situation more awkward. All she could do was ensure that KHABIB and all the passengers received the best possible service. However, the uneasy feeling continued to haunt her throughout the flight. Meanwhile, KHABIB remained as composed as ever. He chatted with the passenger next to him, enjoyed his meal without any special requests, and even smiled a few times at the passing flight attendants. Some passengers who recognized him slowly gathered the courage to ask for photos and engage in small talk. He accommodated them warmly, showing not the slightest hint of arrogance. Alina observed all of this in admiration. She realized that a person's greatness wasn't measured by their status or wealth, but by the attitude and character they displayed toward others. When Alina finally mustered the courage to apologize again while serving his meal, KHABIB simply looked at her briefly before smiling and saying, "Don't worry, I understand. You were just doing your job." That short response had a profound impact on Alina. She never expected someone of KHABIB's stature to be so relaxed and understanding about the situation, without even a trace of resentment. Her respect for KHABIB grew even more. From that moment on, she decided never to judge someone based solely on their appearance again. After several hours of flight, the plane finally landed safely in Moscow. The passengers began gathering their belongings and KHABIB stood up from his seat. Before leaving, he turned to Alina and gave her a friendly smile. "Thank you for the service," he said briefly before walking out of the plane. Alina could only nod in response, still in awe of the man's humility. She watched as KHABIB exited the aircraft with a relaxed stride, while several passengers and ground staff greeted him with great respect. At that moment, Alina realized that today's experience was a valuable life lesson for her. She learned that a true legend isn't just someone who excels in their field, but also someone who remains humble and treats others with kindness, regardless of status or rank. This experience would stay with her, not just as a flight attendant, but also as an individual striving to become a better person. With a small smile on her face, Alina took a deep breath and vowed never to make the same mistake again in the future.